Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arts Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. But of course, before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARTSBaseball on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, trying to get to 5,000 by the time the Major League Baseball season ends. Well, speaking of ends, the series ends between the New York Mets and the Milwaukee Brewers as the Mets drop the rubber game 4-3 in excruciatingly painful fashion. The way this game played out, the way this game went from start to finish, really after the second inning, this game just felt like a gut punch. And it's a game that if the Mets were in it, it's a game that if the Mets were trying to compete with the Milwaukee Brewers for a playoff spot, this would really, really stick in your ribs a little bit longer. But of course, the results don't matter in terms of wins and losses, but what does matter is how you get to those wins and losses. And we'll start with Christian Scott. He was good, not quite as good as he has been. He only goes, I believe it was 3 2/3 innings. He was inefficient. Ultimately, that's what it came down to. It wasn't that he was necessarily bad. It was just some deep counts. It was the inability to put guys away. And it was the fact that after 2 outs, there were some traffic on the base paths. And, when you combine all those things together, what you get is an outing that goes the way that this outing went for Christian Scott, especially with a young pitcher coming off of injury. They're not going to push him in a lost season. And so, again, if this is happening at a different time in a different place, they might be able to push him and have him finish out an inning. But this is a situation where he's not even going to be able to go 5 innings and try to qualify for a win with where his pitch count was and where the inefficiencies in his outing lied. And then you got to look at Milwaukee bouncing back in a major way. Their defense kind of betrayed them a little bit in Game 2 of the series that the Mets were able to win. But back here in Game 3, it seems like they tightened up. It seemed like they said, you know what? We're the better team. We're the team that plays great defense. We're the team that doesn't shoot ourselves in the foot. We're the team that doesn't beat ourselves. And let's get back to that, shall we? And they did, especially in that last inning where, the Mets had some traffic on the bases. They were down 4-2. They were able to scratch out a run, and Milwaukee shut it down. And they shut it down in very impressive fashion, where you sit there and you say, again, the better team won. So that's the part, while this game could stick in your sides, if this Mets team was trying to be competitive, which we know they're not, I think the better team won regardless, right? Like, that's the one silver lining that's become a little bit of a through line here, is that Milwaukee is just a better run organization. They're a better coach team. They're a better managed team. They're a better team. I mean, maybe not with some of the players on the field as a 1-for-1, right? If you roster Juan Soto and Bo Bichette and Francisco Lindor, on paper, the Mets are going to have a team that looks a bit better. But when you boil it down, Milwaukee just functions better. And this is what happens when you have a team that has some, let's call it cohesion. Let's call it a team that just functions the way a baseball team ought to, because as we'll talk about coming up in a moment in the second and third segments, there are things that the New York Mets do that are maddening, that are confounding, that you don't understand exactly how they got to this conclusion. And I think that's one of the things. Yeah, poor play has been an issue. Yeah, poor coaching has been an issue. Yes, some of the players brought in have been an issue. But I think when you boil it down to certain aspects, there is a sort of loyalty, there is a commitment to something here that is amiss. And we'll talk more about it in a second. But if you want to take away a positive, it's the Mets' ability to fight back. They fought literally until the very, very end. And it's that the Mets bullpen was excellent yet again, which is something that we have come to see here in 2026, which is a bit unfortunate because, in the next week or so, the bullpen's going to look vastly different. Rayleigh's going to be gone. Minter's going to be gone. Brazoban might be gone. Weaver probably a little bit more likely than Brazoban, but also might be gone. And then what you're going to do is you're going to find yourself with a completely revamped, remade bullpen. You're going to see some young kids. You're going to see some retreads, some quad A players, some reclamation projects, and the the bullpen probably won't look as crisp when you come out the other side, which means nothing for 2026, but means the Mets are going to have to try to rebuild their bullpen on the fly again for the start of 2027, which we're not going to talk about Luke Weaver today at length, but I think when you talk about the prospect of trying to rebuild a bullpen again from scratch in the offseason, that's probably the biggest reason to not try to trade Luke Weaver here at the deadline in 2026. But I think eventually the offers are going to just get too good and the Mets are going to have to. But you don't want to be in that position every single year. And that's where the Mets have found themselves, even before David Stearns, quite frankly, where they're just trying to rebuild their bullpen all around one guy. Used to be Edwin Diaz. Now it's Devin Williams, whatever. You could say whatever you want about that as far as a drop-off is concerned or whatever. But they're just... It's an exhausting task to do each and every single offseason. And so I think that's one of the most compelling cases to not move on from Luke Weaver. But as I said, I think the Mets are going to get too good of offers where they're just simply not going to be able to say no. That brings me to what really is what tanked this team's chances on Wednesday night. And that is the fact that Brett Baty is playing out in right field. Brett Baty is not an outfielder. Period. Full stop. He's cost the Mets before. He cost the Mets in this game. He cost Christian Scott, a young pitcher who was, again, not with his ultimate prime best stuff, not executing to precision, but he was certainly doing enough to fight his way through that inning and fight his way through this outing. And he ends up giving up 3 runs that have to be earned because you can't give Brett Baty an error on the type of play that he made out in right field or didn't make. But we all know that that's a play that should be made and an outfielder makes. And the fact that Brett Baty has been shoehorned into this position time and time again is so unbelievably frustrating. Now, look, Brett Baty, I don't like him as a ball player. Let's just start right there. But Brett Baty doesn't write the lineup, and we'll talk more about that coming up in a little bit. Brett Baty doesn't put himself in these positions, and so from a standpoint of being put in a position to succeed, that's not on him. From a standpoint of he's a major league player, he's going to go out there and he's going to play, and he's going to do everything that's asked of him, and Brett Baty has done that over his Mets tenure. You can't really fault the kid for, just trying to be a teammate and trying to be a pro. But this idea, this notion that he is some kind of super utility player, and this is we'll start with this portion of it before we get into the larger landscape of how the Mets have kind of failed organizationally on this, not just with Brett Baty, but kind of across the board. This idea that Brett Baty is some kind of super utility player is just flat wrong. Brett Baty turned himself into an above average defensive third baseman. Then when there was a need and there was a question, he showed that he could play some second base. I don't know how good he is really. I would say he's adequate at second base. And then in the offseason, because of that, the Mets decided, well, what if we get him in the mix at first base? What if we get him in the mix in left field and in right field? And he played some left field in the minors a couple of years ago. And I'm like, okay, well, he's an athlete. He can do it. He can't. He proved that he cannot play first base, not effectively, not efficiently, not in a way that is going to help the team. And his bat is not good enough to justify shoehorning him in anywhere other than a position that he's actually good at. And that's where I think the biggest frustration comes for me with Brett Baty playing all around the diamond. He's not an outfielder, full stop. Take that out of the equation. But once he showed that he's not really a first baseman, the Mets kind of abandoned that pursuit, which is funny because first base, all these positions are different. None of them are easy, but first base is more similar to the other positions that he plays. Of course, third base being the most notable one, then second base is, and they keep running him out over there, and then certainly the outfield is. And so this notion that you have to do what you can to get Brett Baty's bat in the lineup makes absolutely no sense. The guy is a below major league caliber bat for the entirety of his tenure outside of maybe a hot month here or there. So this thought process of trying to get this guy at bats doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. We'll talk more about it from an organizational standpoint coming up in a second, but it just doesn't make sense. It's so frustrating. And when it costs your team a win, I don't care if you're playing for wins and losses or you're playing for future development or it doesn't matter what the reasoning is. I mean, he gives up 3 runs on the play and the Mets lose by 1 run, 4-3. I mean, that is a massive swing moment. Now, look, you could sit here and say it came in the second inning and there's still plenty of game to play, and the Mets didn't hold up their end of the bargain in terms of, going out there and facing Logan Henderson. And at one point, I don't know exactly how many strikeouts he finished with, but I know, middle part of the game, you said 8 or 9. And look, I get all that. That's true. I understand it. You need other guys to pick up the slack, pick up your teammate, all of that. But Brett Baty could pick up his teammate there too. I mean, he missed that ball by so much, by feet. He misplayed that ball so poorly that if that happened on my softball team, I would bench the right fielder. Like, this is just such poor execution for a team that's came into the season preaching run prevention. And we'll talk about it again from an organizational standpoint in a second, but just in an individual sample size, I understand you play as a team, you win as a team, you lose as a team, all of those cliches. But man, oh man, if Brett Baty's individual play did not cost the Mets this game. Now, I know he eventually hits the home run, gets them a run back, but I tweeted it at the time and I stand by this. And it's not to pick on the kid, but it's whatever. He has to drive in 2 more runs just to be net neutral for this game. Good luck. So this thought process of having him out there in a position that he has no business being in, especially when you look at the construction of the Mets roster as it stands right now, was just so frustrating. And it's another way the Mets have just continued to shoot themselves in the foot here in 2026. Baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. And you know what I do. I sit down to record this show, but before I hit that record button, I hop on over to the Kalshi app and I look and see where you might be able to find some value. Now, of course, the Mets are off today, Thursday, before starting a series with the other best team in the National League and the best team in Major League Baseball, and that is the Los Angeles Dodgers. So I figured, let's look beyond the Mets here for a moment. And if you go on Kalshi and you just type in World Series, you will see where the market sits for potential World Series winners. The Dodgers are at the top of the list, right around 30%, and I get that. I think there's good value there. The Yankees follow them as a distant second, right around 13%, and I guess there's some good value there too as well, although I don't super believe in the Yankees. I think they're a bit of a paper tiger. I think they have to figure out what's going on with their offense, what they do without Aaron Judge especially, but even what they do without the likes of Giancarlo Stanton. Now, their pitching is going to be legit. Their pitching is going to be tough to beat in the rotation, especially with Cole and Fried now back joining the fold. But the interesting one for me, for a little bit of latte money, for a little bit of fun money, a little bit of pizza money, is Milwaukee. Milwaukee's sitting at 9.3%. We just watched a series with the Milwaukee Brewers. We've talked a lot about how the Milwaukee Brewers are a really run organization and a really good team on the field. Milwaukee is trying to have the best record in Major League Baseball for the second year in a row after finishing that way in 2025. Now, does that mean anything for a World Series? I don't know. But at 9.3 cents a share, I like that value. That means $100 will get you $1,011. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. Must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. So let's talk about the other aspect of what's going on with this New York Mets decision-making process that allows for Brett Baty to start in right field on a day and during a series where the Mets have on their 26-man roster, healthy and available, A.J. Ewing, Carson Bench, Juan Soto, Tyrone Taylor, Luis Robert Jr. That's 5 natural outfielders. Now, I understand Soto's got the tweak in his calf. It's a day game after a night game. They're trying to rest him. He's Juan Soto. You got to take care of him. Okay, fine. No big deal. I understand Luis Robert Jr., they're showcasing him. He's oft injured. The last thing you want him to do is get hurt again, making himself untradeable a week and a half before the trade deadline. Day game after a night game. You want to sit him down. He does eventually come up as a pinch hitter later on, but, so if he's available, he's available, but whatever. You still have Tyrone Taylor. And you can just as easily put Tyrone Taylor out there. Now, I understand there's a righty on the mound, and you want to get a lefty in there, and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. This is not a strict platoon situation. This is not, we're going back to this strict handedness lineup. Tyrone Taylor's had good at-bats against righties, bad at-bats against lefties, and everything in between. Brett Baty is not the kind of bat. It's not like he mashes right-handed pitching. He hits better against righties than lefties, but that's fine, whatever. Not enough to justify playing him so woefully out of position to force feed his bat in the lineup, which, oh, by the way, keeps Marcus Semion's bat in the lineup. Now, look, Marcus Semien hit a home run against the righty, got the first run on the board for the New York Mets in this game. So it's going to sound like I'm sour grapes here, or like Monday morning quarterbacking and saying, well, he did well, but he shouldn't have been out there. No, it's not that. It's just none of these guys need to play. Marcus Semien is not giving you any reason to believe, the home run or not, Baty, same thing, the home run or not, that they need to be in these games. They need to play every day. If you wanted to find a way to get Baty into the lineup, you could have just sat Semien and had Baty play second base, a position where he is adequate, a position where he's most likely not going to cost you a baseball game. And again, I'm frustrated with Baty that he did it, and I don't like him as a ball player, but this is the decision that the Mets make. Andy Green makes the lineups. Andy Green gets input from the front office, I'm sure. And maybe he has more input because he's an interim manager. But Carlos Mendoza, when he was here, was making those lineups. They all but said it. The front office wasn't really getting too heavily involved in the lineups at that point. And you can tell because you could see a lot of touch and feel in those lineups, for better or for worse. Righty, lefty, strict platoons, things that like an older baseball guy, Carlos Mendoza, would do. And so when you start to look at some of how we've gotten here, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, hell, I know he's playing first base for you on a full-time basis, but even Jared Young, who I think would be a bad outfielder, is more of an outfielder than Brett Baty. So, that gets your number up to 5.5 healthy outfielders that you can put out there instead of Brett Baty. And there's this organizational thought process that they need to find this guy who can be a super sub, a super duper utility guy. Why? Why do you need that? You don't need that. Not every team has that. If you have it, it's a good luxury to have, sure. But you don't need it. And if you need it that bad, if you feel like you desperately want that, go out and pay for that guy. Go out and sign Willie Castro, who could play all over the diamond. Now, I get it. They're trying to find a guy who could do it, quote unquote, for cheap, and Brett Baty fits that mold. If Brett Baty's not a starting caliber player, Brett Baty is not a super utility player. Move on from him. If you're trying to have Bo Bichette be your third baseman, move on from Brett Baty. And that brings me to the other point of this thought process, which is trying to squeeze every drop of value out of every single player. This is not a small market team. Now, look, you can't have $30 million players at every position. I get that. You can't have a superstar at every position. You do have to get impact from your minor leagues. You do have to have prospects pan out and help you not only in player acquisition, but on your major league roster. But the Mets have that. The Mets have seemingly hit the jackpot with both Carson Benj and A.J. Ewing within a few weeks of each other. One's 24, one's 21. You don't have to wring the dish rag out for all the value that's left in it for Mark Vientos and Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Baty and Kodai Senga. You don't have to do this. Sometimes you have to know when it's over. This yo-yoing, okay, so let's take the onus off of Baty, right? This yo-yoing of Kodai Senga. He's in the rotation. No, we sent him down. No, we brought him back up. He's in the rotation. No, he's not in the rotation. He's not good enough to do that. We put him in the bullpen. He's a short man. He's a long man. He's a long man. He's a short man. He's in the rotation. He's an opener. He's a starter. He needs an opener. Guys, every time he pitches, he sucks. So if every time he pitches, he sucks, maybe he just sucks. And I know he has $15 million on his contract next year, but maybe you have to eat that money. You just have to move on. Whether that's in the form of a DFA and you just completely release him. But in the offseason, this past offseason, there were probably opportunities, I'm sure, to trade Kodai Senga. There were probably opportunities, I'm sure, to trade Mark Vientos. There were definitely opportunities to trade Brett Baty. And they didn't because they didn't want to lose deals. This guy still has value to us. That's what it feels like. And that's what some of the reporting was. And that's terrible because these guys don't have any value now. So instead of getting something, now you're at a spot where you're not going to get anything. Mark Vientos is hurt and nobody would want him. Kodai Senga is lost in the wilderness. Nobody wants him. Maybe you could still get something for Brett Baty, but I'm sure the Mets are going to say, no. Brett Baty's in our plans for next year. Play third base, play second base. Oh my God, give it a rest. There's an old adage in sports where you save a player from themselves, and it usually has to do with injuries. If a guy's a little banged up, you say, hey, I know you want to be out there, but we're going to sit you down today. We're going to let you rest up. Okay. The Mets need to be saved from themselves in terms of some of these players. I want Brett Baty traded so that we don't have to watch him in right field anymore. We don't have to pretend he's something he's not. The Mets had a luxury for a little while with Jeff McNeil where he was a true super utility player. He played second, he could play third, he could play left, he could play right. Then, towards the end of his tenure, they didn't want to play him at third anymore. And if we're all being honest, Jeff McNeil was no longer really a super utility player. What he was an average to slightly above average second baseman who could stand out in right and left field. He had lost some of his quickness. He had lost some of his ability to truly be a proper super utility player. But he wasn't going to hurt you like this. I mean, the guy did slide out to center field, which was still absurd, but he did slide out there and play adequately enough when there was a true need. But I bring up Jeff McNeil because even he at the end of his Mets tenure, I think, was getting by on old information, was getting by on a reputation of being a super utility guy, which was one thing. But even he diminished. Even he at the end of his Mets tenure was more of a utility player than Brett Baty is. Brett Baty is a third baseman. That's it. He could flex over to second base if you need to. Maybe if that's the weakest spot on your team going into 2027, you can do some kind of a platoon with Marcus Semien and Brett Baty. Sure, at second base. Maybe you can get by that way. That's not how I would do it, but you make improvements in other places, fine. Maybe you can get by with that. Because I don't think he's going to tank your game. I don't think he's going to ruin a game and lose a game for you. And the person he would be slotting in for in Semien hasn't been great shakes either. So maybe that you could stomach. But this other stuff, right field, left field, no. And that's the thing too. And then we'll move on. And we'll get to our last topic, which will be brief anyway. But that's the other thing that really, really irked me. The first time we saw Brett Baty in the outfield, really, was after Soto got hurt. And when Soto first went down, I remember saying, until Mets do his part, if this is day to day, and Soto's going to be back in a game or two, then putting Brett Baty in right field and moving Carson Benj over to left, even though Benj is a natural right fielder, even though you moved Juan Soto to left field to accommodate Carson Benj, even though Carson Benj is a better outfielder, even though you've cleared the entire runway for Carson Benj to be a part of your team, you're putting the non-natural outfielder in right field because the Mets at that point said Baty is quote-unquote more comfortable in right because that's where he had been playing in spring training and stuff like that. If it's for a game or two, I don't love it still, but I get the logic. Put him where he feels most comfortable. Carson Bench is a natural outfielder. He should be able to slide around. Okay. But once Juan Soto goes on the IL and he's out for over 2 weeks, if you need to use Brett Baty in the outfield, Brett Baty needs to learn left field. The whole reason why the Mets moved Juan Soto to left field is because it's conceivably easier to play, especially in Citi Field. So you moved a superstar to left field to accommodate for what you hope is a young star to come up and play right field. But then when that star gets hurt, Brett Baty's playing right field. That follow the bouncing ball, you can't. The logic doesn't make any sense. Once Soto was going to miss 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. Okay, Brett, sorry, you're going to have to figure out left field because we need Benj in right. It's harder to play. It's quirkier. He's got the better arm for it. All of the above. But no, they didn't do that. And that was insane. The reason why I bring this up is months ago. But that was insane then. And you're telling me that over the course of months since, Brett Baty can't go out there during pregame and shag fly balls in left field where maybe he can't cost you as much? I still don't want him in the outfield regardless, so maybe this point is moot. But I think you understand what I'm saying. Put him in a better position to succeed. Because right now the Mets aren't putting anybody in a position to succeed. And so that's how you wind up with a team that's just, it's a square peg round hole. Everything. Trying to wring out value of every single friggin' guy. Why? Sometimes you got to move on. You got to know when it's over. Lastly, talk about Clay Holmes making a rehab start today. I believe it's at AAA Syracuse. Mets aren't playing, so if you've got the MLB package, you can pop over and check it out. I'm sure he's only going to go 2 or 3 innings. I'm sure he's going to need a couple more rehab starts, but with the reporting that we got yesterday that the Mets are inclined to trade Clay Holmes, this is good news as far as that is concerned. I don't want to get into all of my feelings on whether or not they should or shouldn't trade Clay Holmes. We talked about that yesterday. You can go back and watch on YouTube. But just from a individual standpoint of if they are going to trade him getting a rehab start means he's going to have 1 or 2 rehab starts before the trade deadline, which means that teams who are wondering about his health and want to inquire about trading for him are going to see him pitch. Now, they're not going to see him pitch at the major league level. There's not going to be enough time for that. But they are going to see him pitching on what is now a healed, previously broken leg. So if there's any questions about how healthy and effective he could be, at least they can have some of that answered by watching him and scouting him in this minor league rehab assignment. Like I said, I think it's only going to be probably 2 innings, maybe 3. We'll see. And then he can probably get in. Today's July 23rd. The trade deadline is August 3rd. He'll probably get in 1 more where you can get a little bit more of an extended look at Clay Holmes. I guess that bodes well for the Mets too if they want to try to still negotiate with him and extend him or whatever the case may be. But again, the reporting that we got as of yesterday from Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal was the Mets are more inclined to trade him or more likely to trade him than to extend him, which is a big-time departure from the reporting that we got just a few days before from the same folks, Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal, that Clay was open to it, the Mets were open to it, and they were going to have discussions. So we don't know how those discussions went or didn't go or whatever, but if the Mets are looking to trade him getting back on the field is only a good thing. And if the Mets aren't looking to trade him getting back on the field is only a good thing. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, like I said before, sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, trying to get to 5,000 before the 2026 season comes to an end. Until next time, I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.